This is my first time posting in this board. I don't like to tell people about my life and the things I've experienced because I have anxiety, especially related to interacting with other people. I've only told this to a few people outside my family, and I only recently started talking about it. I wish I'd told someone sooner, as I discovered a coworker encountered these men as well. I work downtown, standard 8 to 5 hours. Once in a while I work overtime, but not very often, and not on the day this happened. It was just a couple of minutes after 5 p.m. when I left work. It's just a few blocks from my office building to the train station, and there are a few bars and back alleys along the walk. The worst I've ever dealt with along there are homeless folks who get a little aggressive in asking for cash. They don't usually bother me much. The train ride from the station downtown to the station where I park my car is about 40 minutes. If I'm lucky, I manage to get a seat and don't have to stand for the whole ride. On that day, I was lucky, more or less. I got a seat right next to a window, which left the seat next to me open. At the next stop, 3 men got on. One of them sat next to me, and the others sat on the seats across from me so that they were facing me. I was listening to music on my iPod, so I couldn't really hear them. I did notice, however, that the guy sitting next to me was trying to move closer to me on the seat. He would move close enough so that his leg was touching mine, so I'd scoot away and he'd move closer again. Eventually, I was pressed right against the window and had no doubt that he had more than a few inches of free space on his other side. I was wearing sunglasses and could surreptitiously glance at them. I noticed that they would occasionally say something and then all look at me. It was incredibly creepy and made me uncomfortable. I was nervous about getting off at my stop, but mine is the second to last on the train line. So when the train pulled into my station, I got off. The guy sitting next to me tried to grab my arm, but I was moving quickly and was able to get out. I was hoping they wouldn't get off the train there. It was a busy station and they couldn't know where I was parked. But they did. I guess it was their luck that they'd targeted me. I park in the furthest lot from the station because the parking there is free. It's about a 7-minute walk, which isn't usually too bad, but my lot tends to be pretty quiet, and I was really worried about these guys following me. As a bit of a background, I was kind of fat. I work an office job and I was sitting all day and not working out. Add to that my strong sweet tooth and you've got a recipe for bad body. I was about 30 pounds overweight and probably couldn't run more than 30 seconds. Sad considering I ran track and played hockey in high school. I still play hockey but on a women's daytime league, and it's really not competitive. I'm the youngest on my team by about 20 years, but my mom is on the team too and it's something fun to do together. I was crossing the bridge over the road from the station to the parking lots when I noticed the 3 guys less than 10 feet behind me. I wasn't carrying a knife even though I do own a legal-sized one, nor any pepper spray because it's illegal in my Canadian city. I know a little bit about personal protection though, required class for girls at the private high school I attended in my youth, so I put my car key and my house key between my fingers so that if I needed to hit someone with it, it would hurt them at least a little. The guys followed me across the main lot. They didn't hide the fact that they were there, and the more nervous I was, the louder they laughed. I managed to get across the road between the lots before they got to the road. They had to wait for a couple of cars to pass before they could cross. I was almost halfway across the lot when they finally crossed the road. I started to run, and I could hear their feet pounding the pavement behind me. I used my clicker to unlock my car when I got close, and I wrenched the door open, so glad there was no one parked next to me. I had barely closed it and slammed the lock when the guys reached my car. They were banging on my windows and yelling, jeering at me. I had never been so afraid in my life. I was worried that they'd break the windows somehow and get in. There was a guy at the back banging on the back of my hatchback, so I couldn't reverse out of my spot without running him over. I think I should have, but I was afraid and wasn't thinking. I was screaming as loud as I could, but no one was around to hear me. I didn't know what they wanted, but I knew it wasn't anything good. I wished I had the screamer my mom had given me for protection, but it needed a new battery, so I hadn't brought it with me. That thought, though, the one about the screamer, made me realize I had something even better. When you're being assaulted, you're not supposed to scream for help. Everybody's too afraid to help. You scream fire because everyone wants to watch the blaze. So I turned on my car alarm. It was incredibly loud in my car, so loud that I thought I might go deaf, but it had the reaction I wanted. The guy started backing off, and I saw people walking into the lot looking in the direction of my car. People could see what was going on, and the guys took off back towards the train station. I drove home crying. The next night I started working out, and I've worked out almost every day since. If those cars hadn't been in the road at the time, and if I'd run just a little slower, if I'd been too slow clicking the lock, it all could have ended much differently. I've lost 20 pounds since then, and have gained a lot of muscle. I quit my job. I've had anxiety issues for years, and this encounter made it so much worse. I never want to feel that powerless again. This happened about 5 or 6 years ago. I was 15 at the time, and male, just to note. Now, I've heard from my mom about pedophiles and the like a lot when I was young. Never get into somebody's car, no matter what they offer you, and so on. You know the drill. Never got snatched, and the older I got, the safer I started to feel. After all, who would want to rape a pimply teenage boy? At that time, I was sure that the danger of getting snatched and raped was over. I was an asshole as a teen, compensating for a youth of the glasses plus braces combo, I suppose. Anyways, it was one of those days that I decided to skip the first few hours of school to sleep in. So I took the train 3 hours later, at a time where all the kids are in school already, and the train was almost completely empty. I enter on my stop, and start listening to music to relax. While daydreaming around, I notice the elbow of a person wearing a jacket a few seats in front of me. After another station, the person stood up from their seat, looked around, and came to me to sit with me. It was an elderly man, not old but oldish, 55 to 58 years old, I would guess. He had balding white hair, but even though I was an asshole, I valued manners since I came from a pretty good family, so I took my earbuds out and greeted the man. He greeted me back, but looked at me strangely. Nobody had ever looked at me like that before, and later on in my life, I realized that it was a look of lust. It sounds weird, but it's something real. You notice it in someone's eyes. As I attempt to continue listening to music, he starts up a conversation, despite my signal that I want to be left alone. He tells me that he's returning from a long night of gambling in the big city near my station, and he won big money. I congratulated him and actually got more interested in the conversation, since I'd never talked to a gambler before. We engage in casual small talk, and at some point, he tells me that his new dishwasher was standing in front of his door, and that he couldn't lift it by himself. He asked if I could get off one station earlier to help him, being an old man and all. I tell him that I have school and apologize, but he offers me $50. I tell him no, and he ups the offer to $150 and says he really needs the help. I would just have to get in his apartment, remove the old one, and help him get the new one up. At this point, I'm getting really suspicious. I lived in southern Germany back then. People are very friendly around these parts, and you could very easily ask your neighbors to help you, and they'd most gladly take the time out of their day. I asked him if he had relatives, but he said no, and whatever angle I tried, it ended up with me going back to his home. The situation was getting super intense. I just wanted to go, but I really felt like he would try and stop me if I just stood up. And who was going to help me in an empty train 10 minutes away from the next stop? He noticed that I was nervous and offered me even more money. 200 euros to help him. No money in the world could get me into this guy's home though. He seemed too murder-rapey. So I figured out the perfect plan. He wouldn't engage me when I was on the phone, so while my music was still playing, I pretended like I was just moving my hand in my jacket. After a few minutes of super awkward talk, him telling me I looked strong and well-groomed and things like that, a new song was about to start, and I unplugged my headphones. The new song started up on the speakers, and I pretended that I was taking a call. I excused myself and stood up, turned off the music, and walked out of the wagon to the exit part, pretending to have a conversation with my father. I saw people waiting for the train as we were closing in on the next station. 3 more to my school station, and 2 more to the murder-rape station, and I decided it was time to take my leave. The creepy guy was waving at me from time to time, but I ignored him. The train enters the station, and the creepy guy stands up, coming towards me. At this point, I literally jump out of the train and make a run for it. I looked back as I turned the corner, and saw him leaving the train as well. I've never run this fast before in my life. I ran until I couldn't breathe anymore, called my mother to come pick me up, and never talked about it again. Don't ask me why I didn't talk about it or report it. I guess I thought it was silly reporting a possible rapist as a teenage male. I like to calm myself down by thinking about him as just being an old gambler in the need of help. But deep down, I know that wasn't the case. I'm a 17-year-old female living in the UK. At the time of this encounter, I was 12 years old. I was living in the south of England at the time, and had recently changed schools. It was quite far away, which meant I had to get up early to take 2 trains by myself to get there, as my parents were working and unable to drive me. The commute took about an hour and a half either way. I spent an hour and 15 minutes on one train, and got off at the second to last stop to change trains. The second train was just a 15-minute journey, and was always crowded, as there were a lot of other school kids on it. No one else lived where I did, so there were no other school kids with me on that first train. I quickly got used to the journey by myself. The way there was always fine, as I got on at the same time as all the people traveling to work, so I felt safe with all these professional adults around me. The journey back was a bit quieter, but also fine at first. It then became less pleasant. I started to keep seeing the same man on my journey back, and he always seemed to be staring at me. He looked to be in his late 40s, casually dressed, if somewhat scruffy looking, and he was a bit chubby. Now, the majority of people on the train would go on their phones, or read a book or the newspaper, or even just look out the window if they had nothing better to do. But this man would just sit, hands folded in his lap, and stare at me. Every time I caught his eye, I would look away, only to look back a few minutes later and catch him still staring. At first, it didn't seem so bad. It was just staring, but I started to feel more uncomfortable as time went on. It's like he was starting to gradually move, so he was sitting closer and closer to me, until one day he was only about 2 seats away from me. Although I felt uncomfortable, I still thought it may just be coincidental. After all, he always got off 2 stops before me. One day, however, I was getting on the train and had already sat down by the window, and noticed him getting onto the carriage next to the one I was in. However, As he was getting on, he turned, saw me, and did this weird, creepy grin. At this point, he quickly moved over and got into the carriage I was in, and promptly sat down opposite me. As the train made its way back, I got a phone call from my mom. I stupidly had the volume all the way up, so people nearby could clearly hear what she was saying. She told me that she was going to be late to meet me at the train station, which meant that I would have to wait for her by myself. The train station was always poorly lit and quiet, as it was the final stop on the line. Also, there were never many staff members about either, so I was already nervous about the idea of waiting there. However, what happened next made me feel worse. Once the phone call had finished and I put my phone away, the creep leaned forward slightly and gave me that same creepy grin as before resuming his usual position, hands folded in his lap with a creepy stare. I knew he had heard the conversation. The train continued its journey, and as it did, the carriage was getting emptier and emptier. We stopped at the third last stop, where the creep usually got up. I expected him to stand up and get off, but he didn't. The train started moving again, and inside I was panicking. The next station was 5 minutes away, and at this point there was only me, the creep, and one other person in the carriage, and the person was about to get off at the next stop. I started to feel really panicked. The train eventually stopped and the person got off, leaving me and the creep alone in the carriage. At this point, I didn't know what to do. There were still people on the platform, so the creep didn't do anything yet, but he started grinning at me, shifting slightly in his seat, leaning closer to me. At first I froze, but then I had an idea. Before the train left the station, I bolted through the still open carriage doors, sprinted down the platform and quickly got onto another carriage, ducking down slightly so the creep wouldn't see me. As I looked back, I saw he had also gotten off the train to follow me. Fortunately, he hadn't seen where I had gone, so he was just standing there looking confused and somewhat irritated. The train started to move again, so I felt comfortable enough to sit up and relax. The man caught sight of me as the train moved past, and his expression terrified me. He had a look of pure, unadulterated rage on his face, and his hands were clenched into fists. He stood there watching me as the train passed by. Fortunately, my mom had actually managed to get to the station in time, so she was there to meet me off the train at my stop. I never told her what had been going on right away, as I was worried that I would get in trouble for some reason. It was on a Friday too, so I had the whole weekend before I had to make the journey again. But by Monday, after freaking out and locking myself in the bathroom for half an hour so I wouldn't have to go to school, I finally told her what had happened. The following week, she would meet me after school to get the train with me and see if I could spot the guy so we could get a good description of him to report to the police. I never saw him again though. In the end, we ended up moving to another part of the UK a few weeks after that, and I finished up school early, so I never had to make that journey again. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here, as always. I just wanted to thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end here. If you guys enjoyed the video, please feel free to leave feedback in the comments below, or perhaps like, share, or subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have a personal story you'd like to send in, or you'd just like to chat sometime, go ahead and take a look in the description below. There will be links to all of my social media accounts, including my Facebook, Twitter, and Gmail, so go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to respond or include your story in a video as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is, what its theme is if it has any, and how you'd like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. If any of you are curious about the music used in the videos, the music is always listed in the description below, in the order which it appears, by name, and I'll also have links to the artists in case you like their work and like to check more of their stuff out. So if you're ever curious about the music, look in the description below. Last but not least, if you guys have any constructive criticism, please feel free to leave it in the comments below, as I'm always looking for new ways to improve the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.